And in 3, 2, 1.
You are now listening to the Lapsed Graps podcast.
Hello and welcome to the first ever episode 13 of Lapsed Graps, a podcast where I, Sam, a person who watches pro wrestling, sit down with my friend
GM, who doesn't?
and we discuss the wacky week that was in professional wrestling. Now, I know on Twitter I joked about us just talking about boxing, but it has been 2 weeks, and as much as I would love to talk about how badly Nate Robinson got rocked by a YouTube star and how all of that came about and how he ended up boxing a YouTube star anyway, we don't have a lot of time except to say Nate Robinson got rocked, it looked nasty, and that referee should have stopped the fight way sooner than he did. Also, in my opinion, trainers should be fined or barred or something because Nate Robinson did not lift a glove in defense the entire fight. I don't know if that was the trainer's fault for not coaching him and teaching him how to defend himself, or if Nate Robinson just got cocky and decided he was going to jump in there and just start beating on him. Whatever happened, whatever breakdown in communication that was a problem, and that was scary. It was funny, but it was scary.
It was worse than just him not putting the fist up. Like, there was a point where he basically ran at Jake Paul with his head down. Like, put your head up and your fist up. Like, what are you doing?
There was the point where he got knocked down onto one knee, and then instead of getting back up, lunged at Jake Paul's legs as if he was in like a mixed martial arts contest. It was real weird, and you could tell the guy was rocked like immediately. He got in there thinking it was going to be a fun celebrity exhibition, and then realized that Jake Paul does not play when you call him out, and he paid for it. Which, credit to that, as much credit as can be given to a 25-year-old millionaire who regularly abuses his own power and privilege. The guy takes his boxing seriously. He could have very easily been, it's a celebrity boxing match, and danced around and not gotten hit and not gotten hurt. But the guy takes his boxing seriously. He takes his career, such as it is, as a boxer seriously, and he's here to fight. And I think the quicker that people realize that and stop thinking that getting in the ring with him is a joke, the quicker that we will either see him become a very well-respected boxer or get bounced out of that sport entirely. Because I think the first time he boxes an actual light heavyweight that knows what they're doing, he's going to get rocked, and that's when we're going to find out how serious he is about this as an actual career.
Oh, yeah, that's a fact. Like, I feel like, as far as, from what I understand, like, his first boxing match, like, for pro boxing match, I should say, was against another YouTuber. So, like, being a YouTuber and being a basketball player who's 15 years older than you, like, that's a big discrepancy there. If he gets in the ring with somebody legit, he's gonna have a problem. But I gotta give credit where credit is due, regardless of his past and like all the BS he's been up to. Like, he does take his boxing seriously, like you said, and I don't know where he plans to go with that. I don't see him having like a light heavyweight championship match one day, but hey, if he keeps his training regimen up, he puts his gloves on, keeps taking it seriously, maybe. And you mentioned, like, is that how the fight came about? Nate Robinson actually calling out Jake Paul, and why?
Yeah. So my understanding of the situation, because I am not a huge, I follow basketball, I follow the Bucks, I don't follow everyone in basketball. My understanding of the situation is that he was playing in the Big Three this summer and got injured. When he got injured, he got cut from his team in the Israeli basketball organization. So he was no longer coming overseas to play basketball in Israel. So he effectively had 9 months off after the Big Three season ended and his team got bounced early in the first round of the playoffs. So he was sitting at home, he was rehabbed, he was healthy, but he couldn't go over to Israel because of COVID and everything. So he was like, yeah, screw it. I'll just start, making beef on Twitter, called out Jake Paul, said he could box him, and then got rocked. And as soon as he got rocked, the way that Twitter likes to do, a couple of people went back through his tweets and found a tweet from 2010 that said, if you give me 2 solid years, I guarantee you I can lay out Floyd Mayweather, Roy Jones Jr., the lot of them, flat on their back on that canvas. And they retweeted that and, well, quote tweeted that with a picture of him laid flat out on his back on the canvas, because Twitter is always undefeated.
Especially that weekend,
Oh man,
like so fast too. With the memes came out, like he got knocked out, and then 2 minutes later, meme after meme was just playing the timeline. It was hilarious. One of his finest moments this year, I'll say. But like Nate Robinson, if you're listening, which you're probably not, you're probably ice in your head somewhere. But if somehow you are listening,
if Nate
don't
Robinson's
ever
listening, we got problems.
probably, but Nate, don't ever get into boxing ring, please. Like, I say this as a fan of you and the dunk contest you won that year. Don't ever put on boxing gloves again, please.
Oh man, I think he got in there, and like I said about the Jake Paul thing, he got in there expecting Jake Paul not to take this seriously, because Jake Paul doesn't take anything seriously, and then learned real quick that this is the one thing, sport is the one thing that Jake Paul, against all other odds, will not allow himself to be shown up in. I mean, the guy was a state champion wrestler in arguably one of the hardest states to be a state champion wrestler. So like he's not some slouch layabout. It definitely helps that he was a solid like 10 inches taller than Nate Robinson and had probably a good 5-6 inches of reach on him. But the fact of the matter is, he came in there prepared and Nate didn't, and Nate learned.
Absolutely. I didn't even know Jake Paul had like a wrestling background. So he's at least like semi legit as far as like a background goes, which really that makes me even more disappointed that Nate Robinson just chose to call him out of all people, but hopefully he learned.
Oh, just wait until you hear who Jake Paul called that.
Who would he call out?
The notorious one, Conor McGregor.
Stop it. Jake Paul needs to stop. Like,
So Jake Paul called out Conor McGregor, which again will be a huge pay-per-view buy because I'm gonna watch that fight, and I believe it's in another stand-up boxing match, which McGregor got rocked on right after he retired from the UFC. So I don't know if it's going to get renegotiated into a mixed martial arts match or what's going to happen, but there's video like circulating of McGregor in his home in Ireland, like 2 inches from his face on the camera, like talking all kinds of mad shit about like he wants to run it with me. Okay, let's run it. Let's go. Wherever you want, however you want to do it, let's fight. So, he might have graduated from grandiose aspirations of beating up 5'9" former basketball players and is now going to go after one of the most respected mixed martial artists of our time, which might work out for him. I don't know. McGregor looked real bad in that boxing match, 2 years ago now? So maybe McGregor took his millions and went and sat at home, but if I know mixed martial artists and the way they feel when they get beat, he went home and got a boxing trainer and has done nothing since, would be my guess. So someone's going to get rocked, and I'm excited to see it at some point.
same here. If I was Jake Paul, I would still renege on that fight because that's still Conor McGregor. Like, even though he did get rocked like 2-3 years ago, whenever the Floyd Mayweather fight was, he still went surprisingly like 8 to 9 rounds with Mayweather, which not a lot of people can do.
Yeah, no, like if nothing else, McGregor is going to be the toughest son of a bitch that he has ever fought, because you can't stand across a boxing ring from Floyd Mayweather and just take one to the jaw and then smile at him and not convince me that you're one of the toughest motherfuckers on the planet. Straight up, say what you want about the guy. He's an asshole because he is, but like the guy is tough. At the end of the day, the guy can brawl, and the fact that he held up against Floyd Money Mayweather for 9 rounds, and then you're gonna call him out, and you got lucky because Nate Robinson didn't know what he was doing, and you knocked him out in the second of 6 rounds in a light heavyweight fight. No way. Absolutely no way that goes in your favor.
Yeah, I'll give Jake Paul credit for just having balls of steel. It's either balls of steel or just complete stupidity. But either way, you can't go from just because you beat a YouTuber, you beat a basketball player, you don't go next on your list shouldn't be double UFC heavyweight champion or light heavyweight champion. Like that shouldn't be next on your target list. So
Yeah.
like kudos
The
to him
person
for
that you should be fighting should not be the guy that lost his title, only lost his title to the greatest light heavyweight of our lifetimes. Like the guy who beat McGregor for that light heavyweight title is the greatest light heavyweight on planet Earth. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. I don't want to hear your opinion. Khabib Nurmagomedov is the greatest at his sport on Earth, and he kicked Conor's ass. No one else could touch him. So when the only guy to beat you is the greatest in your sport at what he does, and the guy is like, "Yeah, okay, we'll fight," with that casual confidence of someone who's never been touched in his life, you're gonna have a bad day.
very bad day. Like on one hand, I'm kind of like don't take this fight because I just know Jake Paul is gonna get hurt really bad. It's gonna be him on the floor next. Is the way Nate Robinson was on the floor. But on the other hand, it's one of those goofy matchups. I'm just like, you know what? Do it. Wackier things have happened. I want to see that fight. That fight will get my money if they do it.
Absolutely. And one last thing I'm going to say about this before we actually get into the wrestling, because this is a wrestling podcast. If he gets rocked, which he will, but if he fights him and if he gets rocked and then he gets up off the mat, then Jake Paul's a real boxer. Then Jake Paul can be taken seriously as a combat athlete. It's if he gets rocked and then the match is called and then he goes out into the world and says, I never really cared that much about boxing anyway. I'm a YouTube sensation. It was a fun distraction for a couple of years. That's where we know that you were a poser just trying to make money and knock people out and make yourself look good. But if you get rocked and you get up off that mat at the end of the fight and you say, he got me, he won't get me next time, then I will take you seriously as a boxer. Until then, you're still just some YouTuber.
I'll definitely co-sign that. Like if he gets rocked by Conor McGregor, which he will, if this fight happens, like he just gotta take his lumps like a man, and he'll get my respect if he does. I don't want to hear any like Paul George type of excuses. Don't blame the trainer. Don't say you didn't take it seriously. Just say, hey, I got rocked. It is what it is. On to the next one.
Mm, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So jumping into the news of it all. Unfortunately, we have to go from a very funny moment to a very sad moment, as it was announced this week that Pat Patterson had passed away. He was the inaugural WWF Intercontinental Champion, and more notably, as of 2013 was his season of Legends House, I think. The first openly gay wrestler in the WWF. It was apparently a very open secret. It wasn't widely discussed, but it was known by everyone backstage that he was an openly gay wrestler through the 70s and 80s when he was with the WWF. It just was never really disclosed to the public. He was 78 years old. Man, and there's not many people that when you think of a title, you immediately think of that person. Like, I think you look at the old WWF title and you're going to think Bruno Sammartino. You look at the United States title, and at least for me, because that's when I was coming in, you think of Jack Swagger. You think of the Intercontinental title, and you think of Pat Patterson. You may not know his wrestling. You may not know him from when he was the AWA champion or an NWA Mid-Atlantic champion, but you know Pat Patterson of his time with that Intercontinental strap, that beautiful white belt that Cody Rhodes brought back right before he left the company, and just bringing prestige to a new title and a young promotion, and really honestly securing that promotion as one of the more entertaining promotions in the country. His time with that title is what a lot of people older than us kind of credit with getting them into it, because there were guys that were doing the work rate wrestling. There were guys doing that kind of stuff, but he was the first, at least in my understanding, and admittedly the 70s and 80s are a bit of a dark era for me, that was bringing in the character work with his, he was Pat Patterson. He was larger than life. He was in the pink robes with the tassels. He was this big, bright, vibrant character. But when he got in the ring, he was going to tear your head off, and you were going to believe that he was going to tear your head off. And for the last 26 years now, no, longer than that, 36 years, he's been working backstage with some of our favorite wrestlers of the 90s, 2000s, and 2010s. He's been a lead producer on a lot of people's favorite matches. The first women's Royal Rumble, he was one of the lead producers on. He was, I think, the lead producer on the women's Money in the Bank match that Carmella won. He did a lot of producing for the Becky Charlotte feud that led them to Evolution. He did a lot of producing with Baron Corbin. He did a lot with the last bit of the last Roman run before he got leukemia. Like, he has his fingerprints in all of these huge stars that without his influence and without his understanding of character and charisma and how to carry yourself in the ring and be likable but still be a bad motherfucker, we wouldn't have the WWE we have today without Pat Patterson.
Absolutely, I'll definitely co-sign everything you say. Wrestling in general will look a lot different because he's got his fingerprints on so many wrestlers, so many storylines, so many just influences in WWE. And there's two things especially I always just give him credit for. One being the Intercontinental Championship, because like you said, that's probably the first guy that really comes to mind when I think the towel. Like when I see towel designs, then people may come to mind like the '02 to '09 design. I think Jeff Hardy, the classic white belt. I think more recent people who held it, like Cody Rhodes, because that's just when I was watching. When you just say Intercontinental Championship, Pat Patterson is one of, and sometimes the first person that comes to my mind because he pretty much set the standard for what an Intercontinental Champion is supposed to be viewed as. Like, there's a reason we call it the Workhorse Championship. It's because Pat Patterson and being the very first champion made that belt very special, as big, if not bigger, than the WWE Championship. And I'll admit, that's also a blind spot for me as far as like seeing his matches and character work. But like you said, his impact is undeniable. And again, like that's the first thing I'll give him credit for. The second is just being able to evolve throughout the years. Like he was able to come out of his wrestler career and not only have good impact behind the scenes as a producer, as a manager, guy like that. He when I first time I saw Pat Patterson was his role as one of the Stooges, him and Jerry Briscoe. That stuff was super entertaining. And him just those two working off each other, they had great chemistry. They somehow made Vince McMahon even more diabolical and wacky as the Mr. McMahon character as he was during the Attitude Era. And those two were just super entertaining during that era. So the fact he was able to evolve over time into that role and way different than the Continental Championship, he'll always be remembered for that. And I give my deepest condolences to people who knew him personally.
Absolutely. Fortunately, his life partner of nearly 40 years died in the early 90s, and I believe from everything I've seen and been able to find, he didn't really have much or any living relatives, so it seems like he was the end of his line. But if nothing else, he had a family in the WWE and in the people whose lives he touched every day with his knowledge and grace and everything. And just think, not to make it about his sexuality, because he never made it about his sexuality, and the importance there is that he was an incredible wrestler who just happened to be gay. But think about where wrestling would be now if Pat Patterson hadn't had that courage in 2012, 2013 on the WWE network, on the premiere show on the WWE network. Because if you remember 2012, 2013, when the network dropped, they had Legends House and old pay-per-views. That there wasn't these 400 documentaries coming out every week. It was Legends House and that. And getting on that show and announcing to the world that not only is he gay, but he's been gay and your favorite wrestler his entire career. He's never hidden it. You just never asked. And the bravery that came with that, because even 2013, wrestling was not a super safe place for LGBT plus individuals. And the fact that he was able to say, I'm gay, I've been gay this entire time, and I will still kick your ass if you have an issue with me. And like open that door to like wrestling is legitimately for everybody. We wouldn't have Finn Balor with his wrestling is for everybody campaign. We wouldn't have people like Austin in theory in NXT, think of him how you will, we wouldn't have people like Sonny Kiss main eventing on AEW. We would have gotten there eventually, but I personally truly believe it would have taken a lot longer than 7 years to get to where we are now in the world of wrestling, with how macho and toxically masculine this whole community was kind of raised to be, without people like Pat out there proclaiming proudly that they are who they are and you like them in spite of who they are.
Absolutely, I 100% agree with you there. And something I never really thought about till now, but the more I think about it, even though, like you said, like his sexuality wasn't really showcased or visible, it was just if you knew backstage, you knew. If not, then you just see Pat Patterson on TV. But like his coming out on 2013 at Legends House, that was such like a big moment. The more I think about it, and also, if I'm not mistaken, that might predate Darren Young coming out as like the first openly or one of um
First
the first
openly gay active wrestlers for a major company
that's
when
it.
he
Yes.
signed with MLW. Yeah, because that was that was at the MLW like restart, so that was recent. And that was like 2017 when they like regularly got started with Fusion, was when he came out and said, I am gay, I am signed with a major company and you have to deal with it. That was, yeah, so sorry, I didn't mean to step on you there, but yeah, that was
No, you're
pretty
good.
recent. That was in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I'm glad you did because it actually adds to the point like that's a big moment for the LGBTQ community, and I don't think we get a moment like Darren Young without Pat Patterson's coming out. I don't think we get a lot of things in wrestling now as far as characters and people behind those characters being comfortable and showcasing who they really are behind the scenes. And I really feel like not even just with the wrestlers themselves, but just the overall community. Because when Pat Patterson came out, I feel like that forced a lot of people to just recontextualize how they felt and thought of Pat Patterson, especially the bigots in wrestling community. Because let's be honest, there's a whole lot of bigotry in the wrestling community, not as much as it was some years ago, but I think the reason why there is not as much bigotry in the community is because things like Pat Patterson coming out, it forced people to just accept that queerness is in wrestling. Wrestling itself is unapologetically queer, and it's important to accept that. And if we didn't get Pat Patterson coming out, I don't think we get a lot of wrestlers coming out. I don't think we get certain storylines, angles that we do, certain just people just being comfortable in their own skin, the community, the fans in the community, and wrestlers in the community. So it really puts in perspective just how important Pat Patterson was in the grand scheme of shaping how we view wrestling today, even in ways that some people may not even think about.
Exactly, and I do want to say before we move on, you know, thank thankfully whoever was backstage at the time that Pat Patterson came out, or maybe it was Pat Patterson himself, didn't allow the WWE to make a big like proclamatory deal of it. Like, see, you guys, we had one the whole time. Like, if you didn't know that happened, and if you maybe became a fan in the last couple of years and didn't go back and watch Wrestle House, you had no idea that Pat Patterson was gay. And like, it was so, I don't want to say inspiring because I don't want to use that word improperly. It was so telling about how strong a wrestler he was and how good of a person he was, that WWE's like first thing was, he is a Hall of Famer, he is a legend, he is the Intercontinental Champion, he is Pat Patterson, who happens to be gay. Like, it was never in that same conversation. Whenever Pat Patterson was brought up on commentary, even when he won the 24/7 title, a couple of months ago, he wasn't out there in a rainbow flag. He wasn't out there in, a flamboyant dress. He was just himself, and WWE didn't make a big deal of it, which you would think in polite society today is a given, but we all know the WWE and we all know it's not, unfortunately, a given that they're going to handle things well or respectfully. So the fact that, if not him, that someone backstage had the foresight to say, maybe we just let this be what it is and let it stand on its own and be its own thing, I think a very impactful and good move forward for the wrestling community.
Me too. And I'll just piggyback off that one point, then we can move on. The fact that he never came out until 2013, and we just had to take him as the wrestler he was, take him as the character he was during the Attitude Era. It I think that in itself, and like all my rambling, that was kind of what I was trying to get at. That like it made people accept it more. Like he and WWE didn't make him out to be a character or a caricature through his sexuality. They didn't make the
Hmm.
big deal or an over the top statement about it. They just said, hey, he's Pat Patterson. He's this, that, and the third, former Intercontinental Champion, this, that, and the third, and he's also gay. And it's just something he is. It's not like a part of his character. He just is. And by just presenting someone as just a regular, normal person who just happens to be gay, then that I think that helps spread more awareness about the community and most importantly, acceptance about the community.
Yeah, no, definitely agree. It's it's a huge loss, and he will be mourned and missed for the rest of time. But continuing on with the news, it was announced via his Twitter account 4 days ago that Jimmy Rave, formerly of New Japan Pro Wrestling, Ring of Honor, and Impact, went to the doctor for pain in his left arm, was discovered to have a severe infection that had spread and was subject to amputation above the left elbow, effectively ending his 21-year wrestling career. Overnight, like he went into the doctor, was told that it was infected. They admitted him to the hospital, cut his arm off, and he tweeted that his career was done. There's been no word on if he's doing anything with like any major company as a producer or backstage anywhere, or what he's doing next. Obviously, it's inappropriate to speculate or pry into his life as he kind of deals with this loss. So it was. But yeah, this was really shocking news to kind of wake up to on Tuesday morning, and just kind of like, oh crap. And then the fact that a lot of people kind of thought it was a work until he posted the picture of his stump with like the stitches in it. Like, no, it's not a work. My arm's gone. You all suck. It was really, it kind of, not kind of, it really like punched you in the gut and like reminded you that this is a very dangerous sport. It's a very dangerous art form, and accidents happens accidents happen, things happen, and not everyone's going to be as lucky as John Moxley, where his muscles started to atrophy. He had access to the best healthcare and the best doctors because he was working with the biggest company in the world, and they were able to save his arm and get him back up to muscle mass, and now he's fighting for one of the biggest companies in the world. A lot of these indie guys, they get injured, they can't afford to go to the doctor, they let it sit way too long, and then they lose their careers because of it. And it's one of those things that really says, there should be some form of unionization. There should be some accessible way for these guys to get healthcare in the same way that an actress does who had a bit part on a show 2 years ago, but she's entitled to healthcare because she's got those SAG-AFTRA dues paid. Like, there should be something there. These guys that give us so much entertainment and so much joy and happiness and love in our lives should be taken care of. They shouldn't be left to their own devices like this. And it's just really sad to see such an incredible career come crashing down so hard, so abruptly.
I definitely agree with everything you said, and the news just kind of bumps me out, man. Like Jimmy Jimmy Rave is somebody who there are some blind spots there because I know he's most famous for his Ring of Honor work, and I didn't see his Ring of Honor work until much later. And even though I've only seen a couple handful of matches, I know Jimmy Rave the most from his run in TNA. He had a lot of really great exhibition contests, but most prominently, I remember him in a tag team where he was managed by Christy Hemme, and his tag team partner was Lance Archer. Back at the time, briefly going by
Mm-hmm.
Lance Rock, and they were going as the Rock and Rave Infection, something like that. And it's like it's one of those really wacky heel character acts, but at 11, 12 years old, however I was, I just loved every minute of it. Like their shtick was just kind of great to me, and it Jimmy Ray was like really entertaining and both in the ring and just in character as like the dynamic they had. So like that's like a big loss in the wrestling community. The fact that his career could end abruptly and I'm not sure if bittersweetly is the right word, but just unfortunate, that might be a better word. In such an unfortunate circumstance, it's just really unfortunate, really. And like you said, like I wish there was some way that the wrestling community, as far as wrestlers, had like some type of SAG type of deal where they have the benefits to cover horrendous injuries and stuff like this. And I don't know how close or far away we are from getting that, but I hope we get that soon. Somebody, the right people, put that in place to support the wrestlers who need those type of benefits. And like I'll admit, I'm not the smartest when it comes to trying to figure out benefits and stuff like that. But as far as just taking this news at face value, it's just unfortunate for Jimmy Rave is what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, insofar as unionization or just affordable healthcare across the industry, we're a lot further away from it than we were a year ago because certain people that were frontrunners in that aspect, that I'm not going to mention names because fuck him and he doesn't need any more publicity than he already gets, turned out to be pieces of shit and be preying on the very people they claim to protect. So, unfortunately, we were close for a minute. We're not close anymore, and hopefully, someone is able to pick up that mantle and revamp that movement because it really was a truly inspiring and remarkable movement for the year that it went uninterrupted until it all kind of came crashing down around that one individual's shoulders. And from moving from one unfortunate situation to the other, the third, final, and biggest news story that we have for you this week, WrestleJoy, a very prominent website through the internet wrestling community, has officially closed its doors and deleted its Patreon profile following a string of racially insensitive tweets from founder Andy Nemedy. Now, I'm going to be right up front honest. I'm not super familiar with either Andy or WrestleJoy's work. I know they employed a lot of independent writers and paid them a pretty fair wage as far as wrestling media is concerned. None of them were really paying their bills and like being able to only work WrestleJoy, but they were making a lot more than a lot of us are. And it was good for a while. Their whole thing was that they were a positive and bright aspect of the wrestling community. They never criticized anything. They never posted a negative word on their website. It was all positivity all the time because wrestling at the end of the day is entertainment, and why not just be positive with it? It's I've seen his tweets. They're deeply, deeply screwed up, and he, to I don't even want to say to his credit, but he did come out and apologize profusely. Of course, this was after about 80 to 90% of the Patreon pledges for that month had been closed. Uh, so they lost like 90% of their revenue basically overnight. Most of their staff quit on them and kind of immediately separated themselves from the situation. And then the latest aspect of this whole thing that popped off probably about 3 hours ago is that in deleting his presence on the internet, he had started removing writers' names from the site. So the site, obviously, you have to pay to host a site. So he wasn't going to pay to host WrestleJoy anymore, which meant that these writers who had spent hours on research and interviews and like been paid for their work were having their work removed. But it looked like for a while that the work wasn't actually being removed. It was being assigned different bylines. So people were tweeting with like pictures of their byline on the article, proof that they had written it, and then pictures of the new byline with the new art on the article. Same article, nothing had been changed, but the byline had been shifted. He kind of came out and explained, or claimed at least, that in deleting their profiles from the site and their access from the site, while also maintaining the articles, you still had to assign a byline, which I'm not super familiar with web hosting, so I don't know if that's accurate or not, but it seemed to kind of re-inflame everything all at once. Before I get your thoughts on this, I do just want to recommend going and listening to at Seahawks South Congress podcast. He's a huge presence in the wrestling internet community. He's got a really great podcast. He sat down with Andy for a little over an hour. I think it ended up running at about an hour and 10 minutes, and they went over the entire process and kind of gave Andy the opportunity to explain what happened and what happened, also owning up for and apologizing for his mistakes. It's in no way like a whitewash of the situation. He's not trying to hide from what happened or explain away what happened. He's just kind of owning up to it, saying he fucked up and trying to move on with his life. And I think it's a good listen because, like I said, I'm not super familiar with the guy's work, so I can't really speak deeply on it. But definitely recommend listening to that. And we're going to throw that up in the podcast description and in the description on YouTube, so that you can go and give him the clicks that he rightfully deserves for making that podcast happen.
I'll definitely have to give that a listen because, like you, like WrestleJoy and people around it is kind of like a blind spot for me, and this whole situation is kind of a blind spot. Like over like the weekend or last few days, I've been seeing a lot of like tweets on the timeline, either like people I know or mutuals I know who knew people at WrestleJoy openly condemning WrestleJoy, but not actively saying like what happened. So I'm not familiar with Andy's tweets, and next thing I know, I see a bunch of people on timeline saying I'm leaving WrestleJoy, I'm distancing myself from WrestleJoy. So like it's, I guess where credit is due, whatever Andy did, he's taken accountability for it by having this open discussion with York. But with the site gone, and especially this strange situation with removing people's names from their articles, it seems like too little, too late. If you ask me, and like it just seems unfortunate because again, I don't know too much about WrestleJoy. I do know that when they first started, they were viewed, like you said, like this big positive plateau of the wrestling community showcasing the best and the positiveness that the wrestling community has to offer. And for it to just end like this, well, again, like I don't know much about the situation, but it sounds like, for lack of a better word, a clusterfuck. For it to be showcased as this
Yeah.
positive, yeah, for it to be showcased as this positive thing and to just end in a complete clusterfuck the way it did, it sounds really unfortunate. And most of all, like my sympathy really lies with the writers because like I can't even imagine like you spend so much time and efforts, and from what I understand, just from the way WrestleJoy is posted up, you put a whole lot of passion into these articles, and to have your name removed from them, I don't even want to know what that feels like. So my sympathies with them, and um, if this, I hope this doesn't come off as insensitive. If it is, maybe you can let me know, Sam, and I can take this out. But like like if nothing else, the I guess the least I can do is just offer any writers listening out there who worked for WrestleJoy and just need help getting back on their feet. The the website I run, Uplift United, we pay articles on a submission basis, $50 an article. If you just need, I know it's not much, but if you just need a little bit of something, just pitch something my way and we could work something out. How does that sound, by the way? I don't want to sound too
No, I
like
don't. I don't think that's insensitive. I think that's a very honest and open way of like, look, I'm not trying to give you charity. I'm trying to pay you for what you do, and what you do is you write. And obviously, you write well. Otherwise, like, no amount of hype is going to keep a site going unless there are writers there who care and are talented. And obviously, WrestleJoy had some very talented people working with them. So I think offering to hear pitches or to take pieces that were being worked on for WrestleJoy and pay them in full and put them up is a very valid thing to do.
Thank you for saying that. And just to piggyback off of that, you can pitch articles our way by going to the contact page of the website, upliftunited.com, if you're listening.
Absolutely. And with that note, we are going to have to get into the actual wrestling shows that took place this week, starting off with NXT. There was stuff that happened on Raw and SmackDown this week. None of it was particularly interesting. God bless Raw and SmackDown. Why are you guys in the the main cable prominent spot for professional wrestling. Money is why, but I digress. So with NXT this week, we had the go-home show for TakeOver WarGames. WarGames is a pay-per-view that I was not expecting to be excited for because there was zero build-up like 3 weeks ago, and now holy crap, Sunday cannot get here fast enough. This show's going to be insane. Okay, so the show opened with a video tribute to the life and career of Pat Patterson. The only reason I'm bringing up the fact that it was video tribute, well, obviously it's WWE. They do a video tribute every time. HBK is front and center on the ramp next to Triple H. Triple H is in a nice like suit. He's got the black shirt, the black suit jacket. Like he looks good. He looks like he came to work. HBK is in camo shorts and a Captain America tank top with his camo hat. Just like holding his hands in front of his chest, looking somber and sad because it's a very somber and sad moment. But he's just like, oh yeah, I just showed up and this is what I wear to work every day, and they told me to go stand out there. And I was like, no disrespect to Pat Patterson, but like, holy shit, like give the man some pants. What the hell?
Honestly, I wouldn't expect anything less out of HBK because I remember there was a WrestleMania where he showed up with cargo shorts, a t-shirt, and like a tie that wasn't even, I don't even think it was tied. It was just around his neck. And this was WrestleMania. It would not surprise
Wasn't
me
it a
if
clip-on just on his tank top? 'Cause I think I know which WrestleMania you're talking about. It was just a clip-on, like clip to the front of his tank top. He's like, "You told me to wear a tie. I wore a tie." For whatever
That's
reason,
right.
it's very like Pat McAfee wearing like suit shorts to WrestleMania 35. That's like in the same vein of it's suit material. You told me to wear suit material. Well, whatever. I make $1 million a year. Go away. No, here's why I'm so jazzed for War Games, because obviously it's War Games. It's gonna be, some of my favorite matches every year from NXT come from War Games. I'm really glad they've serialized it while making it feel normal, and I'm still so happy that we get the William Regal War Games moment every year where like you're like, oh, it's getting closer to December. Are we gonna get a War Games? War Games? And then he just shows up and everyone just starts chanting War Games, and he holds the mic up and he's like, War Games. It's my favorite thing in professional wrestling is watching this 65-year-old man get giddy at the using his big boy voice to say War Games into a microphone. But the men's War Games match is Undisputed Era, who are faces right now in this feud at least. They're the faces here. I want you to keep that in your mind. The biggest heel faction in NXT history are the faces facing off against Pat McAfee's stable of the Brit Brawlers and Pete Dunne. So it's McAfee, the Brit Brawlers, who are your current NXT Tag Team Champions, and God bless them, they deserve it. They've been in that system forever with no strap, and they're holding on to that strap for dear life, and they look good doing it. And Pete Dunne, the longest reigning NXT UK champion of all time, the bruiserweight, a bad man who looks just shredded. He looks so good, and they're going to destroy each other. I am worried for Bobby Fish's like entire body. The dude seems like he gets breathed on and he's out with a knee injury for 6 months. He might just die in the ring. It's going to be amazing, and I'm excited. But I'm more excited by the women's War Games match, which is Team Shotzi Blackheart, and that's Shotzi Blackheart, Rhea Ripley, a face, Io Shirai, and Ember Moon, who, if you don't remember, returned at TakeOver 31 or 32. One of those weeks where it was like, oh, there's a TakeOver this weekend. Weird. And then it was like, oh, yeah, but Ember Moon's back, so you care. Facing off against Team Candice LeRae, which is Candice LeRae, Uber heel, Dakota Kai, Uber heel, Raquel Gonzalez, Uber heel, and Toni Storm, Uber heel as of last week. She came down to help Ember. Ember and Candice last Wednesday had a one-on-one match. Candice beat the shit out of Ember Moon, like went old school, like I've got tacks in my heel, like I'm Crimson Mask PWG Candice, like brutal Candice, beat down Ember Moon. Toni Storm came down to help Ember Moon and just laid her out and left her to the wolves, and just a big Cheshire cat smile on her face. I'm really excited for heel Toni Storm. Like as soon as she got to Stardom, she was a huge heel because all Gaijin are heels in Stardom, and then she got the the main title in Stardom and held it for like almost a year and became the biggest babyface and has never really worked heel since. And that was like 3 or 4 years ago. But I love her heel work. She's so good at being an asshole. She's so good. It's kind of like how The Miz is a genuinely nice guy who just plays an asshole so well that you kind of wish he was just an asshole. Toni Storm is that way, but she also plays a good person so well that you feel physically like attacked when she turns, and it's going to be so good. Especially if we get that like face-off stare down in the center of the War Games ring with Rhea Ripley and Toni Storm just staring through each other, reminding us all of those wars that no one watched on NXT UK because no one watches NXT UK.
It's weird. I'm trying to put my head around like a heel Tony Storm. It's harder than I thought because like you said, like her Japan work technically was heel because she's Gaijin. Pretty much all Gaijins in Japan are heels. But like maybe it's just like the American perspective, but like Westerners, I guess when Westerners see her work, it just when I see it, I see a very babyface moveset and like very babyface man. It's the type of like cool babyface, or like yeah, the cool babyface with like an edge that I guess Adam Cole might be playing right now, and like the type of Adam Cole was in like the tail end of his Ring of Honor career. That's why I always thought of like Toni Storm. So it's like to try to imagine her as like a straight up heel now. It's hard for me to wrap my head around, but like if she can make it work, she can make it work, and she's talented enough where I think she can make it work. But that War Games match overall just sounds dope. Like the women's War Games always has a knack for kind of like overshadowing or at least outdoing the men's version. And just looking at that lineup, I would not be surprised if that happened this year.
Yeah, I just personally am really glad we're not seeing Johnny Gargano in another War Games match. Like, the dude is very, very talented. I hate him in gimmick matches. I just, for whatever reason, there's something about the way he sells and the way like he contorts his face. You know, there's a big spot coming because he'll just tense and you're like, oh, he's gonna get thrown off the cage, or oh, someone's gonna hit him with something because he's waiting for that impact. And for whatever reason, I can't stand that. So, yay, we don't have Johnny Gargano in a War Games, and this is going to be an insane match. I'm surprised that you have a bigger issue with Toni Storm as a heel than you do Io Shirai as a good person.
Well, with Io Shirai at least, like again, like maybe it's the thing that's kind of like I guess been normalized in like Western communities where like you see a heel with an edge, or I'm sorry, baby face with an edge, and like they've got that heel tendency, but like they act cool, so hey, everybody cheers them. And Io Shirai has always had that to me. Like I feel like when she turned heel, like she got a big pop. People loved her ever since, and I can imagine that for Toni Storm as well. But like on another note, like without seeing the storylines, I can at least imagine why that heel turn would make sense. Because if I'm not mistaken, you said that she returned the same night as Ember Moon, so I can imagine like as far as like pop levels, like I'm thinking Toni Storm coming to NXT and Ember Moon returning to NXT probably got a way bigger pop than Toni Storm. And I can see that being like her motivation as like a heel. And I think that can work if that's the case.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking for myself, watching that event live, when they'd been hyping it up for weeks, like we talked about, a former NXT champion is going to be returning at Takeover. I was thinking, Bo Dallas. I was thinking Bray Wyatt. I was thinking Seth Rollins. I was thinking maybe they had found a way to like sneak Dean Ambrose out of AEW somehow. Just really crazy off the wall ideas. And then it was an NXT UK Women's Champion. I was like, oh, okay. She's good. She's talented. I'm very excited to see her on any given day. But when you put that expectation out and you're like, okay, whatever. And then you immediately follow it up with, okay, but no, now we have the second most dominant women's champion in the history of the promotion also coming back on the same night with the same goal in mind. And then you're just like, oh, especially since like when Ember and Asuka were in NXT together, the work rate, all respect to the four horsewomen, was a lot different than it is amongst the women's roster now. Like the women's roster now, as far as work rate goes, could destroy the women's roster than if they were in the same place in their careers, because you've got the likes of Raquel Gonzalez, Mia Yim, you've got Shotzi Blackheart, you've got Rhea Ripley, you've got all these incredible indie talents that have been destroying the scene for years and years and years, crisscrossing the country, putting together these 5-6-star matches that are now in NXT and just ready to show what they can do. And I think Ember Moon is definitely one of those. She was definitely the early wave of that second generation of like, oh no, these are like women's wrestlers being brought into NXT. And I've got a soft spot for her. She's from Dallas. She's from my hometown. Word up. And she's incredible. She's so good.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like you can definitely like understand why there'd be a bigger pop for Ember Moon than Toni Storm, because like as much as we all love Toni Storm, like Ember Moon was gone from NXT from X amount of years and was injured, and like I think people were talking about like how it's such a scary situation that there was some doubt if she would wrestle again. So for her to return and make NXT her new home, it makes sense to like that you'd be more excited for that. So like, but the fact they could work that into the storyline of Toni Storm wanting to come into a big thing and Amber Moon kind of stealing her thunder, that makes sense in storyline to me. And I think you also mentioned like that Toni Storm had like a not very good match a month or two ago, so like that also adds to the whole, I guess, underwhelming feeling. So all of that packed into each other, I think that could make for a good storyline, and just a heel one just gives Toni Storm a fresh start. Like she had to live up to the expectation of returning alongside Ember Moon, and if, on if you're both on the babyface side of things, you're gonna come up short trying to meet those expectations. So why not move on to the heel side and create new expectations for yourself?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I definitely think the heel run is not necessarily needed, but definitely necessary, because there are so many incredible women in that division right now, and there's really realistically only one title for them to chase. I know the women's tag titles are defended across 3 brands, but with COVID, no one's crossing brand lines unless they're specifically told to, and no one really seemed to want to go back over to NXT to challenge or to defend their women's tag titles very much anyway. I don't honestly even know who has the women's tag titles right now. I think it might still be Shayna Baszler and Nia Jax, but they haven't been on TV in weeks, so who cares? So with 30, 40 women that are all incredible and all superstars in their own right chasing after one title, sometimes you need something a little off the wall to let yourself stand out, and that's what Toni is able to do here, and I'm really excited to see how much she buys in and how far she runs with it.
Agreed.
All right, and that'll do it for NXT. We're going to jump into AEW. This was a huge week for AEW. There was a lot that went on. There are 3 things that I want to talk about that are varying degrees of holy shit. They're all holy shit moments. They're varying degrees of holy shit. We're going to go with level 1 holy shit right now. Next week, MJF will face Orange Cassidy for the Dynamite Diamond Ring. Moving on from our level 1 holy shit to our level 2 holy shit, and you're going to fight me on this, but it is level 2, and you'll find out why in a minute. Sting has made his AEW debut. Like Sting, like WCW, TNA, Sting, like the Stinger, Sting. Sting, the wrestler Sting with the white man, Sting, made his AEW debut. Cody was being beaten down by Team Taz, which now includes my boy, Will Hobbs. He's known as Powerhouse Hobbs. Hate the name, love the wrestler. So he's being beaten down. Powerhouse grabs the TNT Championship because it was a tag match between Powerhouse Hobbs and Ricky Starks against Darby Allin and Cody Rhodes. So he grabs the TNT Championship. He's got Brian Cage and Ricky Starks holding him up. He's about to run in and batter him. The arena goes dark. Everyone's real confused. And then you see this vignette open up on the screen, and it's like a large, almost Irish looking countryside, wide open spaces, dark clouds, lightning. You're like, who the hell is this? And then it just comes up letter by letter, Sting, and no one reacts because no one thinks it's real. And then the lights come up, and he's in the ring, and he looks good. And
Really?
There's not a punch thrown, there's not a move done. He just stands there and stares at them until they drop Cody and roll out of the ring, and then he turns and he stands there and he stares at all 340 pounds of Will Hobbs, badass, I will pick my teeth with your bones, Will Hobbs, until he drops that title and rolls out because he's terrified. And then he turns and he crouches and he just gets nose to nose with Cody Rhodes. Doesn't say a word, just stares at him. Vigilante Sting is in AEW and I cannot wait. Oh my god.
That's actually great. Like, that sounds pretty great. Like, Vigilante Sting was always the best thing, where like you didn't know whose side he was on, but he was always there, just kind of lurking with the bat, either helping you ambiguously or screwing you over ambiguously. So like, if that's the road they're going, that's gonna be fun. My question is that, okay, you mentioned that he had basically like a stare down thing with Cody, and he looks in good shape. Is Sting about to wrestle?
I think if we're gonna see Sting wrestle, we're gonna see Sting wrestle Matt Hardy in a cinematic match with the Lake of Reincarnation, and we're gonna get one final look at Surfer Sting before he retires for good, and then becomes a backstage. Like, I think, honest to God, I think we're eventually gonna get Matt Hardy and Sting, Vigilante Sting, in like a Hardy compound, Lake of Reincarnation. He's going to put him in the lake. He's going to come out. He'll have buzzed his head. He'll have the bright colors, the tights. He'll look shredded because, of course, he will. And he'll do, his Surfer Sting thing. And then he'll lose that match and he'll fade into the background as a producer. I don't think he's going to be a very long on-screen talent. I mean, he's as old as The Undertaker. His career's as long as The Undertaker's. And he's not been as active as The Undertaker was. Like, he took some time off there, here and there. But this dude is a legend and old, and I think you're going to get one cinematic match, low impact, and then he's going to kind of fade back and become maybe like the de facto guy for people like Darby Allin, who is so clearly influenced by Sting, and like all these younger guys that are coming up that have all this indie talent and indie experience of like, this is how I play to a crowd of 100 people, but don't know how to play to an arena of 100,000. And as good as Cody is, and as good as the Young Bucks are, and as good as Kenny Omega is, if this year and a half of AEW has taught us anything, is they can't coach like that. They can't sit you down and say, here's how you play to this crowd. Their kind of opinion is, go out there and make mistakes, and if you make mistakes, you'll learn not to do it next time, and that leads to some really awkward matches. So I really think they're kind of cultivating these guys that were at the top of their game and are still young enough and clean enough, with all respect to Jake Roberts, to sit down and have a real conversation of this is how you handle this. Like, they've got Matt Hardy to handle Private Party and some of those younger tag teams that they're bringing in, and say, this is how you do tag team wrestling in front of 100,000 people at 24 years old and not kill yourself. And now they've got Sting to be like, this is to go up to Darby Allin, Powerhouse Hobbs, Ricky Starks, MJF even, although MJF seems like he's got no issues at all, and say, this is how you be 24 and a world champion and the biggest person in your company when your company's brand new and it doesn't destroy you. And I really think they need that kind of like presence and that voice backstage for this company to survive long term.
A few things on that. One is, first off, if AEW find a way to bring back Surfer Sting, however they do it, this is the greatest company in the world. Like, I'll just say it flat out right now.
100%.
Two, I'm really impressed with just the overall roster that AEW has as far as like having veterans on board. Not just like wrestler roster, but personnel, backstage personnel, like Jake Roberts, Jerry Lynn, and now Sting. You've got they've got wrestler wise, they've got a very
Don't forget
young
Taz.
roster. Oh yeah, Taz, of course. As far as like the actual active wrestling roster, they've got a very young roster when you really look at it top to bottom. So the fact they could bring all these veterans in, and some of them exclusively backstage roles, others like Sting, it seems like, in front of the camera and backstage, that's a lot of knowledge to bring to your young roster. And I think if they can implement the right tools to that young roster, guys like Orange Cassidy, MJF, Darby Allin, you're going to get a roster with a whole lot of longevity. Like, if you think these guys like MJF are great now, watch them 10 years from now when they've really put to work the kind of knowledge they've gained from a Sting, a Jerry Lynn, a Taz, stuff like that. And I'm really impressed with what they've compiled there. And three, I'm just super interested to see what they're doing with Sting next. Where this is, because this doesn't sound like a one-off. I'm guessing that he's here for, if not the long haul, then at least for a minute if he's in shape and having stare downs with Cody Rhodes and just working the whole vigilante Crow 94 Sting angle.
Hmm.
So I'm very curious to see where that goes, if that leads into a match, him coaching someone in front of the camera, him just lurking in the background like, again, 94 Crow Stain, where he's just in the shadows forever. If he just does that for the rest of his career, if he gets paid doing that for the next 5 years, just looking in the shadows, then Steen has got, for lack of a better term, the bag, basically, if that's all he's going to do for the next 5 years. But yeah, that's impressive. That's very impressive on AEW, and I hope
That's the
now they
one
have.
thing. Oh, sorry.
I was just
Go
gonna say
go
now
ahead.
that they have Sting, I hope they just use him correctly, or at least put that money into good use.
Yeah, and that's the thing I wanted to say is I hope they don't immediately put him in a manager role because I think it became very clear with the Vicky Guerrero experiment that like managers work when the managers make sense. But like Nyla Rose deciding she needed a manager and getting Vicky Guerrero didn't work. Vicky Guerrero is a very important person in the wrestling community, obviously not only because of who her husband was, but because of what she was able to do, you know, making a career for herself in wrestling after her husband passed and all of her time in WWE. But if it doesn't make sense, it's not going to work. No one's going to care. So I hope that they don't put Sting immediately in that like manager role because especially if he's Crow Sting, it doesn't make sense. Like why would Crow Sting be standing on the apron being like no, you need to do it like this? No, he's gonna hang out in the corner with his baseball bat, and when you piss him off, he's gonna kneecap you and he's gonna walk away. That's what Sting's gonna do. So, I did want to say it does seem like it's gonna be for the long haul because it was announced on Twitter afterward that Sting had signed a contract and he was all elite. So they
Okay.
they've not done that with a lot of people that ended up being contract workers. So he has at least signed some sort of contract to make him exclusive to AEW for now, and they are the exclusive online carriers of Sting merchandise. All Sting merchandise is off of WWE.com. It is all found at AEW.com now. So it looks like he's going to be around at least for a little while. But no, so keep that in mind. Sting in AEW is like a level 2 holy shit. Here's how the show ended. Don Callis is on guest commentary for Kenny Omega versus Jon Moxley for the AEW World Championship. Don goes down to ringside at one point because Jon is just beating the holy hell out of Kenny. Kenny looks washed. He doesn't look good. There was worry initially in the match online that like he had gotten injured early on because it looks bad. And so Don is like calling for the ref to like call the match, and that's when people started to think it was a little kayfabed. And he's got a microphone and he's like getting on. He's like, "You need to call this. He's obviously injured." And then Jon Moxley like snatches the mic away to be like, "No, stay out of my way. Like I'm going to win this match." And drops the microphone. At which point Kenny Omega picks it up and beans him across the skull with it, playing possum. Pulls him into the one-winged angel, drops him. 1, 2, 3. Kenny Omega is the new AEW World Champion. Here's how this goes, though. So Kenny Omega, World Champion. You would think there's a huge celebration. There's not. Don Callis immediately grabs him by the collar, pulls him out of the ring, and they book it backstage. There's no celebration. There's nothing like that. Commentary is screaming about how it's a screw job, about how Don Callis obviously orchestrated something, how that wasn't how it was supposed to go, like pulling back the fourth wall and saying that's not how it was scripted, that's not what was supposed to happen. Jon Moxley should still be your champion. They're running, like sprinting through backstage. People are screaming at them. You see people throwing things, like losing their shit, like how you would expect backstage to be in, what was it, 96, the screw job?
Yeah. No.
Yeah, so
97.
97 in Montreal when everyone backstage knows that Brett's not supposed to give up the title yet, but it happens anyway. Just losing their minds. He's pulling them through. They get outside, and Alex Marvez comes up and is like chasing after him and goes like, "What just happened? Why did going on?" Like not really using the mic, but kind of using the mic. So it's like, is this kayfabe or is he just like freaking out and trying to figure out what the hell's going on? Don Callis grabs the mic and says, all will be revealed on Tuesday night. AEW is not on Tuesdays. You know what is on Tuesdays? Impact Wrestling. Kenny Omega is taking the AEW World Championship to Impact Wrestling on Tuesday night.
That's because I was gonna ask, like, isn't Don Callis in Impact Wrestling? I'm thinking
Yeah,
that he
he's
left Impact or something for a second.
he's the head booker and EVP of talent for Impact Wrestling. So Kenny Omega is on Impact Wrestling on Tuesday night. Now, immediately after the show, the Young Bucks tweet a picture of themselves as Generation Me in front of the TNA banner. Cody Rhodes tweets a picture of himself and Brandy Rhodes when they were in TNA. Kenny Omega, I don't think, was ever really active in TNA. Neither was Hangman Page. So neither of them tweet anything. But Jordan Grace, Ethan Page, Rich Swann, Chris Bay, all of your major Impact players immediately start calling people out. The Motor City Machine Guns Twitter account just tweets 3 letters, FTR. The Good Brothers Twitter account tweets, "This is going to get interesting. We'll see ya on Tuesday, brother." Bullet Club is back. Bullet Club is back in America. AEW and Impact Wrestling are working together, at least for now. The world has exploded and is good again.
I don't know what to say. Like I'm still trying to process it. My brain is just kind of like you said. The word exploded. My head is exploding right now. Like that is wow.
And what
Like
gets really interesting is when you consider that AEW and New Japan have been very tangentially like starting to feel out working with each other. Like you had Kazuchika Okada and Tetsuya Naito show up virtually for Chris Jericho's not retirement ceremony, but like his 30th year in the business. Like that episode, they were both virtually there. It's been publicly acknowledged by AEW that Jon Moxley is the New Japan Pro Wrestling American champion. And the Good Brothers have been talking about rebuilding that relationship between Impact Wrestling and New Japan, because New Japan is very old school of like, you burn me, we're done, which admittedly the Young Bucks and Cody burned New Japan Pro Wrestling, so they're kind of done. So they could be starting to rebuild all of that. And so we might, if not the major New Japan guys from Japan, we might see New Japan USA Dojo guys showing up on AEW and Impact Wrestling. And just thinking, if I'm the EVP of Impact Wrestling, if I'm Cody Rhodes, if I'm anybody in the New Japan office, and I'm saying, how do we convince people that WWE is not the only option? You join forces with the other 2 guys that are competing for that spot. You keep your separate companies, you keep your separate books, but you join for it and you just run them out of business. I'm so excited. Oh man, it's gonna be so cool. I hope it lives up to everything I've just set it up to be. Oh man, I have not watched Impact live in many weeks. I am watching live on Tuesday night.
I don't blame you.
No way I'm not watching that live. There's absolutely no way. It's going to be insane. And even if it's not insane, it's going to be so cool just seeing Kenny Omega on Impact Wrestling with the AEW World Championship.
Absolutely. And like this is one of the things that I always felt like this was like AEW's like best attribute, just the fact that when you counteract it with WWE, who really rarely, if ever, acknowledge other wrestling companies. It's like, especially for the longest time, it was our history began. The history of wrestling and WWE begins and ends with WWE. You counteract that with AEW, and they not only fully embrace the fact that these are guys from other organizations. They actively say Kenny Omega, former IWGP champion. This guy was an Impact champion. This guy did this in that company. This guy was in Ring of Honor. And they also form active relationships with different indie organizations and what's it called, CMLL. I think that's what's the other about that?
It's AAA that
AAA.
It's AAA that Kenny Omega is the mega champion.
AAA, that's it. Yeah, they've cultivated relationships with so many different companies, and the fact that they're doing that with Impact as well. First off, that really helps build Impact itself because they haven't really been at the same level where they're mentioned the same vein as WWE in about a decade, really. But by putting themselves next to the second biggest wrestling company in the world, that helps bolster Impact a little bit, not only by bringing views to them, but just rebuilding that credibility they kind of lost a decade ago. And this is just if they have actual Avengers Infinity War level crossover with Impact, like that would be. But it's the type of thing that I only dreamed about when I was a kid. When I used to book like WWE versus TNA matches and SmackDown versus Raw or wherever wrestling video game I was playing. Like this sounds like something that would only happen in a video game, but if they're actually going for it, I joked earlier that AEW could be the greatest wrestling company if they get surfaced in. If they can pull this off, that becomes a serious conversation now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's definitely one where this is the easiest way for them to, because they've kept up with NXT, but they haven't touched Raw or SmackDown. Like they're keeping up with the little brother, but they haven't quite kept up with the big one. And if they're able to do this and do it well and do it interestingly, not only are they going to keep up with the big one, but they're going to elevate everyone else involved. And I think at this point, with the pandemic still very much going on, it's very clear who the winner of the pandemic is so far in wrestling, and it's Impact Wrestling. They have slow played this so beautifully and been able to pull themselves from like easily the fourth or fifth on my watch list every week before the pandemic started, to being the only one that was going active, so I watched them every week, to being so inventive and interesting and innovative with the people they were bringing in and all of the things they were doing, like Wrestle House and stuff like that. Even if you hated it, it was different and it was cool. And now publicly partnering with the second biggest company on earth, and you kind of want to see the Impact people work over the AEW people. You don't want to see the AEW people be fed Impact roster people. You want to see Jordan Grace and Sheeta square off. You want to see Rosemary and Sue Young, or Rosemary and Sue Young are on the same company. Jeez, you want to see like Rosemary face off with like um,
Abaddon? Is that
Dr.
her
Britt
name?
Baker or a Abaddon's an easy call, but I think Rosemary and someone like Nyla Rose would be a much more interesting match. Like Abaddon is very easy. Like, oh yeah, freaky and freaky. That'll be fine. I kind of think Abaddon facing off with someone like Britt Baker, who just doesn't know what to do with her, would be much more interesting, and it would play into a lot more of Britt Baker's strengths. But just the fact that like your your immediate thought isn't, oh God, who are they going to feed to AEW? It's, wait, who is AEW going to feed to Impact? The fact that that code switch has happened in like everyone's brains is so impactful, for lack of a better word, and so telling to how good this company has been for the last 8 months.
Absolutely. And like again, like there's so many different like crossover ideas and dream matches that can come to this. Again, like I said earlier, like this is something that as a kid I only would have imagined happening in video games. Like in 2007, 2008 equivalent to this would be a WWE versus TNA crossover. And like even as a kid, you're like, oh, that'll never happen. It's cool to put Sting versus Undertaker in a video game against each other, but that's never going to happen in real life. There's so many dream matches that can happen from Impact versus AEW altercation. It really makes you want to watch both. It makes both companies feel must see in that regard. And speaking of must see, the fact we've talked about so much excitement growing this crossover, we haven't even began to touch on the fact that John Moxley, after a year plus, has lost the AEW championship, and that really speaks to how big this Impact AEW partnership is. The fact that the longest world championship reign, even the biggest talking point right now.
Yeah, no, I think that definitely speaks to how intriguing this aspect is that, yeah, John Moxley in kayfabe got screwed from his title and he's going to be pissed. But what's going to happen if, say, Kenny Omega goes over to Impact Wrestling and drops the title to Willie Mack? Is John Moxley going to come to Impact and challenge Willie Mack on a Tuesday night? is Willie Mack going to come to a Wednesday night and show up with that title and wave it in his face? Who is Jon Moxley going to kill to get his title back on the Impact roster?
Honestly, now it's got my brain going as far as like Kenny Omega showing up on Tuesday and then Jon Moxley just pulling up from the parking lot, just taking out every Impact wrestler that's just in his way. Like, he doesn't want to fight any of them. They're just in the way of the one guy he wants. And just imagine the domino effect that all of this could cause. It makes me want to kind of like get into it a little bit, but I know like it's because the concept of this podcast, me getting back into wrestling is illegal. So I'll just sit with you telling me what's happening.
Yeah. All right, but yeah, that does it for Impact, or not Impact Wrestling. We haven't even gotten into Impact Wrestling. That does it for the AEW segment. Real quick, we do want to touch on New Japan Pro Wrestling. Right now, both World Tag League and Best of Super Juniors are going on. World Tag League leaders right now with 8 points are Sonata and Shingo Takagi. There are 5 teams with 6 points tied for second place. You've got Bullet Club, which is Evil and Yujiro Takahashi. Chaos, which is Tomohiro Ishii and Toru Yano, which Yano continues his reign of, wait, am I actually a good wrestler? And just kind of taking things seriously and being sort of coached in that regard by Tomohiro Ishii. And it's really good. You've also got the Great Okan and Jeff Cobb. So Great Okan was a young lion who, I believe, in 2019 to not a lot of fanfare and hasn't really done much. But he and Jeff Cobb are just killing it. And as much as I wish Jeff Cobb was back in AEW working as Chris Jericho's enforcer, him in New Japan Pro Wrestling just makes a lot more sense. You've got the Pillars of Destiny, who were kind of the front runners for World Tag League, are in second place tied with the 5 other teams, which is pretty surprising. And then Suzuki-gun picks up the last tie spot for second place, which is Taichi and Zack Sabre Jr., the former New Japan Pro Wrestling IWGP World Tag Champion holders. You've also got the Best of Super Juniors, of course, with a 3-way tie for first place of 8 points. Hiromu Takahashi, widely considered the greatest junior wrestler in New Japan history. You've got Master Wato, who made his debut earlier this year and is really coming to his own. And then Taiji Ishimori, Bone Soldier as well. There's also a 3-way tie for second place in the tournament with Bushi, El Desperado from AAA, and Sho, all kind of bringing that up. So it's a show every 2 days, 3 hours, really good wrestling. There's not a lot to go over because the shows are in their 11th and 12th show apiece. So if we tried to go match by match, we'd be here for another 6 hours. But it's really, really good. This is shaping up to be a really solid month and a half of wrestling from New Japan.
Okay, I can't say too much about teams involved. Just because there was a lot of names I wasn't familiar with, either because they're a bunch of new guys or because my memory's terrible. It's been too long since I've seen New Japan, and I forget a lot of things, so that might be it. But if nothing else, I will say that World Tag League and the Best of the Super Juniors are 2 of the most exciting tournaments that New Japan has to offer every year. That's not the G1. So the fact that it can do this both at the same time, that sounds like that sounds like a special treat for the New Japan fans, even though obviously there are circumstances that force them to do it this late in the year at the same time. But again, it's 2 of the biggest tournaments they have to offer, and I think in the same regard as the G1, they're good introductions to New Japan. I think if you're looking to find a way to find your entryway into New Japan, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. These tournaments are the place to start if you decide you need to start. All right. And speaking of Impact Wrestling, we're going to jump right in with their weekly results. Now, we've missed a couple of weeks. They've been running their women's tag team tournament to determine who's going to be the inaugural champions of the rebrand of the tag team titles. Those finals are coming at Hard to Kill, which is January 16th of next year. Right now, we've got in the semifinals Havoc and Nevaeh are going to face off against Jazz and Jordan Grace, which the date of that semifinal has not yet been discussed. And then Kiera Hogan and Tasha Steelz are currently in the other semifinal match and are going to be facing off against Deonna Purrazzo and Kimberly, or Taya Valkyrie and Rose wins in that match, which I believe is coming on this coming Tuesday. I have not
Can
been
we,
able to find.
can you pause for just 1 second? Did you say
Yeah,
Jazz? Like Jazz
yeah, I
Jazz?
did. Jazz, like NWA's longest reigning women's champion, Jazz. Yeah,
Yeah, that Jazz. That Jazz is wrestling?
yeah, that Jazz is wrestling with Impact Wrestling as a partner to Jordan Grace, and looks damn strong doing it.
That is not a partnership I ever would imagine, but that sounds amazing to be honest. And I could have sworn I read somewhere that Jazz was retiring when she dropped the NWA belt, but if she's still going at it at however old she is in Impact, like that's kind of awesome.
Yeah, no, I think had planned to retire because I know she was like working backstage with like a couple of promotions out in Texas because she lives out here. But I think Impact just called her and had the right price. And she's like, yeah, okay, I'll come back at least for a while. I can't see Jazz and Jordan Grace winning the tournament. I do think it's going to end up being Valkyrie and Rosemary, or Deonna Purrazzo and Kimberly. But either way, it's going to be a series of really, really cool matches to go forward. And that's really all I wanted to talk about with Impact. Not a whole lot going on over there right now. Obviously, that's going to pick up on Tuesday, but just real fast, we do want to go over MLW, which has restarted officially. They've been back for about 3 weeks now, and they're in the middle of their Opera Cup 2020. Now, the reason we're talking about MLW and the Opera Cup of 2020 is because ACH has finally made his long-awaited debut with MLW. This was rumored right after he left the WWE, and then he ended up retiring for a time, and it looked like it wasn't going to happen. And then he started doing indie dates, and maybe it was going to happen. And then there was the pandemic, so it wasn't going to happen. And now it's happening. CH pinned Laredo Kid, the current AAA champion, just straight up heavyweight champion, to advance to the semifinals of the Opera Cup. Low Key beat Davey Boy Smith to advance to the semifinals, also in that episode. So Tom Lawler will face off with ACH next week in a semifinal match. Low Key will face off again. So we're gonna get Tom Lawler versus ACH, which is gonna be really, really cool. A good like mix of styles and how that works with Tom Lawler's kind of down and ground and pound, like real deep, like grappling sense of wrestling, and ACH is kind of off the wall, high impact, high intensity, high flying sort of style. It's gonna be a really, really cool match.
Yeah, like Tom Lawler has always been like one of my favorite like MMA centric wrestling styles, and that's obviously because I guess he spent some time in UFC, but he's always been a fun guy to watch. Same with ACH for a completely different reason. Like he's always great to take to the air. So you get a guy who can't help but stay in the air versus a guy who tries to stay to the ground as much as possible. I think that could be a really fun dynamic. Like two super contrasting styles. Like the saying goes, like two negatives make a positive. And I've learned that like two contrasting styles always make for a really fun, unique match. So hopefully that's the case with this one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It should be a really solid match. At the very least, it's going to be a really fun match. But that actually brings us to the end of the week in wrestling. So this is where I'm going to bring up my indie watch list. Obviously, I watch a lot of wrestling. I also watch a lot of indie wrestling. So every week I come to the show and I try to recommend something that may have skipped your radar for one reason or another that you should go and seek out and see. This week I'm going to actually recommend two shows, and that's Black Label Pro's Turbo Graps Tournament. It's parts 1 and 2. Both are on independentwrestlingtv.com. It's like 5.5 hours of wrestling. No one really knew it at the time, but this ended up being one of Kylie Rae's last independent wrestling events. I think she did the Stadium Series for Warrior Wrestling like right after this, and that was the actual last one. But this was like one of her last like real like weekends of wrestling and hardcore tournament style wrestling. There's solid wrestling across both cards. Day 2 is where I would focus because it's going to have a Black Label Pro Midwest title match and an IWTV Championship title match. It's one of those where if your only experience with Warhorse is his time on AEW facing Cody Rhodes, and he looked strong, but he was a little weak. He was a little, too easily taken over by Cody. Go watch this match. He is anything but weak. There's a reason that he has been the IWTV heavyweight champion for as long as he has. As he really is truly incredible, and it's only a matter of time before he signs somewhere.
Okay, that sounds like a good recommendation. And I guess that brings us to my segment. What's the long-winded title I give it? If you want to get into wrestling, then here's how you get into wrestling. It's been 2 weeks. Just give me a break. I'll the gist of the segment, like asking if you want to get into wrestling or not. So, is now a good time to get into wrestling? Is a resounding yes, because apparently Impact and AEW are having the crossover of a lifetime, and I think that definitely could be must-watch TV, even if it's not the best TV. That's too much of a colossal type of event to miss. So like you're gonna want to watch live Impact, live AEW going forward. Like I said, legally I can't like watch it live. Best believe if all the good stuff that Sam's telling me in the weeks coming up, I'm definitely gonna pull up the old YouTube machine and look at all the clips of John Moxley storming through the Impact Zone, and Kenny Omega defending the AEW Championship against Willie Mack and Rich Swann. This is just some random dream matches off the top of my head, so I'm definitely gonna pull those up. But for now, since you're not illegally obligated to commit to a podcast concept, I'd say definitely watch wrestling live, specifically AEW and Impact.
Absolutely. I completely co-sign that. It's already a really fun time to be a wrestling fan. It's going to be a really, really fun time to not focus all of your effort on WWE in the coming weeks. And if you choose to focus all your effort on WWE in the coming weeks, that's on you, but at least you'll have us to break down everything you missed. So that will do it for us here at Lapsed Grab. Thank you all so much for tuning in. You can follow me on Twitter at Gladen, Sam. You want to spell out comma, so that's GLACOMMASAM, and read my coverage of all things pro wrestling. A lot of places, honestly, just go to my Twitter bio. There's a link to a link tree. Everywhere that I'm writing right now is listed there. Otherwise, we're going to be here for 3 minutes. I'm writing a lot. I'm writing a lot. I love writing. I'm writing a lot.
And if you like bad tweets, bad pictures, all things of like the bad type of ilk, you could just follow me at WhereMammothJam on Twitter and Instagram. But if you like good stuff, you can go to upliftunited.com, where you can, for one, figure out why there's an Eminem portrait behind me if you're watching this on video. And two, there are some good content creators creating good content over there. So you're going to want to check that out. And of course, there's a podcast network over there that houses this podcast, Not That MJ podcast, the Bogue Talk podcast, and my other podcast, Mental Health Check-In podcast. So you want to check out all that good stuff.
Absolutely. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on YouTube and wherever wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a rating and a review. It really seriously does help us out. You can always follow the show on Twitter at LapsGraps. That's LAPSEDGRAPS. And until next time, we out.
We out.